Our world has been developing and evolving over the last few decades, although in some cases not all for the better. With the increasing need of new technologies and medical breakthroughs, there's been greater efficiency in global production, and as a consequence, the living experiences of individuals globally. Distinguished economist and policymaker François Bourguignon states that globalization has helped accumulate vast amounts of wealth for some, while for billions in the world, globalization means old ways of life eradicated, threatening their livelihoods and culture. We're currently living through a growing trend of inequality and social disadvantage, making the lives of the poorest poorer and the lives of the richest richer. According to Fernando Mireles, the director of City of God, during an interview with Slam magazine, he explains how as a middle-class citizen he did not feel affected by the conditions people faced in the favelas. He states, "It seemed like it doesn't affect us," saying that society allows these things to get to this point as we don't think it is our problem. Mireles says that the problems depicted in the City of God are not just a Brazilian issue, but one for the global community. It's the same in the US, Latin America, and Africa, where there are a lot of people without food, but everyone thinks this is not their problem. This couldn't be any further from the truth, especially because all economies are so closely related. According to author Jordi Estevão, we need to alter the way in which we view and study social exclusion. It is no longer adequate to study social exclusion through an economic lens. It's more important to view it in the context of the society within which it manifests. When analyzing social exclusion, there is a tendency to restrict it to the themes and patterns of analysis. However, beneath those themes and patterns are real human experiences and human implications that are not being brought to the forefront. I think it's fair to say that there is often a disconnect between those studying it and those experiencing it. This video aims to bridge that gap. By analyzing the film City of God, we are taking the audience on a journey to experience the realities associated with communities that experience this plight. Welcome to my video essay on social exclusion. Welcome to the City of God. Mireles recreates the realism of what it's like to actually live in the favelas through a number of cinematic and film techniques. The introductory scenes appear to be intentionally claustrophobic and intense, designed to portray to the audience the actual living conditions of those in the favela. In addition, he deploys some film techniques such as handheld shaky footage to give the audience an unfiltered perspective of the events being shown. This at times makes the film appear almost like a documentary, whereby the audience is experiencing a first-hand account of the events being portrayed, rather than a work of fiction. The chicken chase scene in the beginning is a clear representation of the people of the favela, the unlawfulness that dominates this community, as we see young children casually running with guns in hand. For most of us in society, we simply go to the supermarket to buy our chicken, whereas such luxuries are not available in the favelas. At an economic level, social exclusion is evident in the lack of opportunities and resources available to the residents of the City of God. The chicken scene is emblematic of their social conditions and experiences. There is no way they will let that a chicken escape, with the residents willing to recklessly shoot in order to prevent its escape. This demonstrates the desperateness and the differences in priorities for those living there. Food is so scarce that to secure it, individuals are prepared to risk the injury and the lives of those in their own communities. The lack of basic resources enhances the cycle of poverty and exclusion, making it difficult to break out of their current circumstances. It is clear that members of this community live by their own rules and don't abide by the conventions of a normal society regulated by the rule of law. Indeed, the chicken's life is a representation or a metaphor of those who live in the favelas. Their chances of survival are non-existent, and at some point or another they will be affected by the gangs. No matter what corner one turns, danger lurks around it. This is not an environment dictated by lifestyle choices, but one based on survival and instinct. Brazil is a deeply unequal society, possibly the most unequal in the world. It is believed by social economists that endemic or chronic poverty stems from the fabric of an unjust and unequal society. Even though structures have been democratized and modernized, legal systems are not fully cleansed of open injustices, especially for those who are marginal and are excluded from society. We see horrors of the past coming to plague society in the form of widely accepted discrimination with extreme inequality in status and property ownership. During this scene, Shaggy is about to do what seems impossible, escape the favelas, but the car breaks down. He pushes while the police close in. We see him running in an open space away from the claustrophobic favelas. This symbolizes his desire for freedom, with the girl of his dreams waiting for them to make their escape. Even though all he has to do is jump in the car, the realities of living in the favelas catch up with him. There is no escape for millions of people. The more they disconnect from society, the harder it is to reconnect. With crime seeming to be their only option, there is hardly any chance of developing a successful future. This has a generational impact which we see in the film as generations of families following the same trends. It's easy to focus on the heinous crimes we see in the film, but we often don't take much notice of the heinous conditions that the offenders live in, and how these conditions literally shape the decisions they make in their lives. The youths in the city of God hardly even consider education a choice. To them, a life of crime is simply the most viable option, with an early death almost a certainty for the majority of its residents. We honestly should commend Mireles for his realistic approach in making the film, especially for using role actors from the favelas. According to Mireles, the stories of the favelas were always told through a middle-class point of view. Mireles purposely changes this approach for the film and centers it around the perspective of the people that actually live there. He literally puts the camera on the other side. He even went to the level of not using professional actors, giving the actors the authority to improvise the script, building the script around them to ensure the most realistic approach, and recruiting actual residents to fulfill these roles. This is emphasized by the fact that throughout the film, we hardly see the Rio de Janeiro that we're all used to, but instead we constantly see the marginal and socially excluded areas, i.e. favelas. Research undertaken by the European Economic Association suggests that the level of global inequality has always been very high, which reflects the persistence of a highly hierarchical world economic system. Their findings read as follows. The global top 10% has oscillated around 50% to 60% of total income, while the bottom 50% share has generally been around 5% to 10%. The global top 1% share alone has generally been between 3 or 4 times larger than the bottom's 50% share. This leaves the bottom 1% literally fighting for scraps, and normally leads to unethical forms of generating income, like drug dealing, which only exacerbates the problem further, with a lot more news reports covering this issue.
Extreme wealth and extreme poverty have grown simultaneously for the first time in the last 25 years. That's according to Oxfam. The charity's report, Survival of the Richest, is being presented at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
Billionaires' fortunes have not increased because they are now smarter or working harder. Workers are working harder for less pay and in worse conditions. And that is because the economic system is rigged this way. There are multiple drivers for the vast inequality and rise in extreme poverty we can witness, with only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue is from wealth taxes. And we need economies that work for everyone and not the privileged few.
In the 2003 book titled The Concepts and Strategies for Combating Social Exclusion, it states millions of human beings in the world survive in conditions of poverty and social exclusion, with this trend unlikely to change in the years to come. Without significant intervention or alternative ways of viewing the phenomenon, this compelling situation affects the whole of humanity. We cannot and must not close ourselves to this reality, otherwise we are complicit. The poorest 50% of the population own just 2% of total global net wealth. The middle 40% of people own 22% of total global net wealth. And the richest 10% of people own 76% of total net wealth. The social consequences of this distribution are brought to life in the city of God. In the end of the film, we see all-out gang war, with the community completely overwhelmed by the rival gang war. This is a clear indication of the impact the world could face if we continue to ignore the consequences of social exclusion. We see a very grim society with no laws, no police attending, where all members of the community are impacted. Most who have experienced their own versions of social injustices, mistreatment and abuse of rights. With no help in sight and no one to turn to, majority pick up arms and take part in the violence. It's worth noticing that the majority of those who join the gang wars are minors. Throughout the film, we see the use of weapons. Perhaps this is the tool of choice for the voiceless. We see the consequences of what could potentially happen if we continue to ignore social exclusion, a ticking time bomb that, if not dealt with, will eventually erupt. This emphasizes the need for structural change to address the root cause of exclusion, including economic inequality, institutional discrimination, and cultural practices that contribute to such inequalities. City of God emphasizes the importance of social justice and the need to create inclusive societies that ensure the basic rights and opportunities for all.
Meu cheiro, já matei, já roubei.